The headlines after this election weren't just about who won. It's how they won, or in some cases, didn't. In Sunbury, a city council race ended in a perfect tie, 751 votes to 751. In Shamokin, a man convicted of a felony won a seat on city council while preparing to report to prison. In Selinsgrove, voters ushered in a new mayor after a competitive race, and that shifted the town's direction. And in Milton, a borough once decided its mayor's race by just 4 votes. From ties decided by chance to councils rewriting their constitutions, Pennsylvania's local elections this year show democracy at its personal and sometimes its most chaotic. This is democracy up close. This is local elections, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. So let's start in Sunbury. Election night came and went, and when the dust settled, the tally was dead even. 751 to 751. If that doesn't make you a believer in every vote counts, I don't know what does. Under Pennsylvania law, a tie like this means that it's settled not in a runoff. It's really by luck. And so whether it's a flip of a coin or drawing lots, that's really how they're going to decide who sits on council. Sometimes it's even picking names out of a hat. Yep, that's right. That's how they'll decide who gets this seat. And so the difference between serving on council or not all comes down to maybe who picks heads. And this kind of razor-thin outcome, it's not rare. In fact, in Pennsylvania, dozens of local races are decided by a single vote or by chance. And so this is a reminder that small-town democracy isn't about margins by thousands. It's about whether or not your neighbor actually showed up to vote. So let's zoom out for a second and look at a few other towns that tell the same story in different ways. Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, we have a mayoral race this year that drew a lot of attention for being competitive in a really interesting way. And so Michael Bolig won with 575 votes, over 505 votes for Eric Vicker. Which is crazy. Fewer than 1,100 people voted. And that small turnout will determine how things shift and change in that college town. It reminds me back of 2021 when the Milton Borough mayoral race came down to just 4 votes. Now, on election night, it seemed like there was just 1 vote that stood between Tom Aber and Joe Morales. But after a recount, it turned out that the vote was, by 4. And now, fast forward to 2025, Aber ran as a Republican, not a Democrat, and edged out his competition 735 to 375. And so in small town politics, so much can change. So whether it's the tie in Sunbury, Selinsgrove's 70 vote spread, or the cliffhanger 4 votes in Milton, these elections matter so much. And it tells a story not only about the community, but also about who's participating in democracy. So let's take a look back at Shamokin's election this year. And council candidate was on the ballot despite being convicted of felony charges and being ordered to report to prison. Yes, he campaigned. Yes, he received votes. And yes, he won. But under Pennsylvania law, convicted felons can't hold elected office until their sentence is complete. So voters are left wondering, is this a protest vote? A sign of loyalty? Is it frustration with the system? How is it that on the local level there can be one rule, and yet on the federal level there's something else? It's an extreme example, but it taps into that there's something bigger going on here. And do we see a sense of trust in our local institutions, or has that trust been broken? Do people want leaders who reflect their frustrations with the system? Maybe they want people who reflect who they are and are a part of their community. Makes you wonder about second chances, especially in somewhere kind of like central Pennsylvania, where I think that second chances are a really big part of who we are. So that brings me to another set of Pennsylvania towns asking another question. If you don't like how your local government is running in Pennsylvania, can you just rewrite the rules? Actually, you can. So most municipalities in Pennsylvania, and we've got tons of them, there's so many fiefdoms, there's a thing called home rule. And so if you don't like the municipal code, you can create your own constitution. It's like a choose your own adventure. And many communities do this because they want to decide how they tax, how they budget, and how they elect their officials. And so across Pennsylvania, we see more and more towns putting home rule on the ballot. And it's interesting because the standard municipal code can seem a bit like a straitjacket. It limits the powers of that municipality and what it is that you can do. And very often, although home rule gives you more control, it can be very politically charged. So whether it's rewriting charters or redrawing districts, which we also see, I think that Pennsylvania has been experimenting with the great experiment that is democracy itself. We also see this very interesting quiet revolution happening. And so at the very bottom of local ballots, there are these additional questions that people see. And so for some people, it was, shall the sale of alcoholic beverages be permitted in this municipality? We've had a bunch of dry towns in Pennsylvania. They're carryovers from, Prohibition. And there are others that have some, open container laws where you can, stroll down the street with a bevy of your choice. And some of them even have approved Sunday sales. And it may seem trivial, but when you talk about community and economic development and what shifts trends and what, Pennsylvania being a big push for outdoor recreation and bringing people to visit. These are the things that we have to talk about. How do we balance tradition, economy, and change? And what's that going to look like? And so we see some of these decisions and they jumpstart downtown economies, or in some instances, they cripple them. It's the same thing that's happening right now with thoughts around whether or not you should have, these vape shops or those skill games. Many communities are thinking about how to legislate around these activities, and it's really interesting. So behind every local race is an army of election workers. They are these community members, and they're often volunteers, who ensure that democracy runs. And we saw a few hiccups this year. Some e-polls froze. There were some precincts with printing errors. And Still, every vote needs to count. There was even a federal court ruling that clarified that ballots can't just be thrown out because a voter wrote the wrong date on the envelope. It's a small, but it's a significant change for very close local contests, especially because when the ballot comes to 751 to 751, one of those mail-in ballots could make all the difference. And so let's end where we began with that Sunbury tie and what that tells us about civic life in Pennsylvania. When everyone says, oh, I don't have to worry about these municipal or midterm elections, I just show up every year to vote for president, I think that we have to stop that rhetoric and remember that every vote does count. Two candidates stood side by side and had to face the fact that it could be either one of them. And now it comes down to luck. In Selinsgrove, we're going to see a shift in, leadership and potentially a shift in policy because less than 1,100 people showed up to participate in that election. In Shamokin, it was either an act of defiance or, raging against the machine. We'll see. But local government matters, and it matters more and more as we look at who do we want to be as a community and how do we want to function? And what are the things that we really want to see happen? And so in Pennsylvania, throughout the Susquehanna River Valley, I implore you to remember that your vote counts.